Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, EV stocks get a boost as President Biden mounts a major push to accelerate the adoption of electric cars. Tesla shares rise before closing down. We'll talk about it all with Wedbush's Dan Ives. Plus, the global chip shortage. How bad is it? How long will it last? More from my interview with IBM CEO Arvind Krishna. And social media spreading anti-science skepticism, how Facebook and Instagram are actually fanning the flames of misinformation around COVID vaccines, and anti-vaxxers are targeting women. All those stories in a moment, but first, U.S. stocks touching record highs. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has the full picture. Kriti, break down the day.
Well, Emily, you saw a lot of green on the screen. The S&P 500 in the green, of course, positive trading. And a lot of it on the surface looks like it's very tech-driven. You can see the New York FANG index, the index housing some of those big tech names, up 1.4%, but not substantially higher than the S&P 500. And that's really because you saw a lot of sectors in the green, not just tech, even energy at the top of the pack. But I really want to show you what the EV space was doing and what it has been doing for the past year, because a big question going into today's market session was how much of Biden's infrastructure plan and push into EVs is priced into the market. And just look at this chart here. You can see that really since Biden's election back in November, you've seen this major run up until some stagnation at the start of the year. So it really tells you that there has been a lot of that priced into the market. The question is, when we come back and start that new quarter of positioning on Monday, will we see that EV space continue to rally? Now flip up the boards. I want to show you some of the other pieces of the read-through from Biden's talk. Semiconductors at the top of the pack. We know they've been rallying from that chip shortage. And look, having another massive day, up 3.7%. He was also extremely tough on China. Some of those very targeted comments towards that country didn't really translate into that Chinese ADRs. The NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index, housing the likes of Alibaba, Baidu, also doing pretty good. And lastly, the NASDAQ Biotech Index, which isn't really tech in the traditional sense, but it's rallying in line with even those big tech names and things like semiconductors as well, Emily.
All right, Kriti, thanks so much for that roundup. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. Meantime, after a hard year for most EV stocks, as Kriti was mentioning, most getting a boost as President Biden mounts a major push to speed up the adoption of electric cars. The president's infrastructure proposal unveiled this week allocates $174 billion to EVs, including sales rebates and tax credits for consumers who buy American, in addition to various industry incentives. For more, let's bring in Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities. So what does this actually mean for electric car companies, specifically Tesla?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to kick off what we believe is a green tidal wave. In terms of the whole ecosystem, I think in terms of Tesla and GM, the reason it's important is I think part of it is they're going to lift the ceiling on the 200,000, where now you'll start to see tax credits restored for Tesla and GM. And we believe, based on all of our checks in the Beltway, that the 7,500 goes to 10,000 or potentially more. And that's why right now, this is the start of what I believe is a $5 trillion market, with definitely Biden kicking off the green tidal wave in the U.S., which has underperformed when we look compared to China and Europe.
But why this reaction in the shares today? They popped a bit midday, closing down, though, about 1%. Why did investors react that way?
I think this was a bit sort of buying rumors, selling the news. But if I look out, I think EV stocks are up 30 to 40% from these levels. Because what we're seeing in China, you saw with NIO, Xpeng, and I believe we'll see it in Tesla over the coming days, is around China's continue to see skyrocketing growth. For Tesla, that could be 40% of sales. And then you combine that with what we're seeing in Europe across the board, and of course now in the US, I think this is just a start. Even though a lot of blooms come off the roads for the stocks, I believe that's near term. And I think all the good news starts as we see more deliveries and numbers over the coming weeks.
Dan, you cover Uber as well, and I'm curious what trends you see post-pandemic for car ownership, car purchases versus ride sharing.
Yeah, I think for now, especially as on a reopening play, that names like Uber and Lyft continue to be front and center, even despite some of the headwinds that Uber's seeing in the UK. But no doubt from a ride sharing, I think we're seeing a share shift. You're seeing more and more, especially in urban areas, as there's an urban migration. That's a benefit for names like Uber, especially where they play. But when we look at car ownership, I think we'll see auto sales spike over the coming year in terms of the reopening, but it's important that we're going to see a transformation on EV. Today, 2% of automobiles in the US are EV. When that goes to 10% next 4 to 5 years, which is why right now it's just the start of a massive ecosystem really being built out on the auto front.
What about tech more broadly? Are big cap tech stocks really reopening plays, or has the incredible rise that they have seen over the last year, are we going to see that start to change?
I think the sell-off's been overdone. I know we've talked about it. In our opinion, in terms of the reopening, take a step back. A digital transformation in terms of the shift to the cloud, talking about $2 trillion over the next decade. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and really across the whole ecosystem with cybersecurity and some of these others. There's poster childs like Zoom that will see moderated growth. But I think we're going into a golden age for tech in terms of where we're going to see spend. And I think what we're going to see over the coming 3 to 4 weeks, tech's going to rally significantly in terms of earnings. We think across the board are going to be beat and raise specials. And I think that starts what we believe is a rally to a NASDAQ 16,000.
Does regulation concern you? We just saw the CEOs of Alphabet, Facebook, Twitter testify on Capitol Hill, and we know that more scrutiny is coming.
It definitely is in terms of big tech versus Beltway, especially on Section 230, but just broader on antitrust. We're seeing those swirls not just in the Beltway, but also in the EU and Brussels. I think for now it's a contained risk. No doubt this is going to be a long sort of 12-round battle, but I think the biggest risk for tech continues to be China. The U.S.-China cold tech war right now, I think it's a bigger risk on tech stocks. We think about 10% risk right now, a discount to tech, given the view that Biden was going to be softer on China. As we've seen, it's sort of been the opposite. So that's really going to be a fork in the road situation over the coming months.
So talk to us about some of your other more unsung tech reopening plays. You highlight in your notes Okta, DocuSign, CrowdStrike. Talk about some of the names we don't talk about as often that you think will surprise us.
I think on healthcare, there's a name like Nuance. I mean, more and more we're going to see healthcare spending increased amounts on cloud. I look where Nuance are a pure play on healthcare. Love that name sort of front and center. That could be a re-rating stock, ultimately $60, $70. Another name I like on the reopening is Cerence, which is an auto play. This really directly benefits in terms of what we see. And I think that's a name they're going to be more and more driven internationally in terms of that being almost an auto cloud play. So love those two sort of front and center. And then I think some other names on the cybersecurity side, hybrid environments, 30 to 40% working from home potentially. You're going to see names like SailPoint, Varonis on the cybersecurity side. I think get another big lift as we're starting to see out in the market.
All right. So where do you think we end 2021?
NASDAQ, I think the ball drops in Times Square, NASDAQ 16,000. I think tech stocks rally 30% from here. And it's my view, this has sort of been a golden buying opportunity. And then I get the whole rotation trade, 50-bit move in the 10-year doesn't change the multi-year bullish view on EV as well as tech in terms of where we're seeing it. So I think this is going to start to play out over the coming weeks with numbers that I think will really surprise the street on the upside.
All right. Well, always love that you come to us with specifics, Dan. Thanks so much, Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities. Appreciate it. Meantime, investors are showing their loyalty to the famed ARK Investment Management founder, Cathie Wood. 2 of her exchange-traded funds adding $1 billion in a single day this week. Her flagship ARK Innovation ETF took in a record $717 million on Tuesday. Meantime, the ARK Space Exploration and Innovation Fund took in $281 million on its first day of trading. All right, coming up, IBM CEO Arvind Krishna took over when the world was in turmoil amidst pandemic lockdowns. I speak to him next about his vision for the company's next chapter and when quantum computing will truly transform the industry. This is Bloomberg. As vaccines are administered around the world and pandemic restrictions loosen, companies are trying to chart a path forward. IBM CEO Arvind Krishna said he expects 80% of their employees worldwide will go back to work in a hybrid model. In an in-depth interview for Bloomberg's Work Shifting Summit, I asked Krishna what the next chapter of IBM innovation looks like under his leadership and how the global chip shortage is impacting their work. We started on IBM shares, which have lagged over the last decade, and whether that will be a measure of his success.
Investors only have the one measure, which is the stock price, and that is a definite part of my own report card and the company's report card. But let's just step back a little bit. There is the strategy of what you do, and then there is the how you do it. So I've been clear, we are going to be a hybrid cloud and AI company. And then I would say, as a bit of a half sentence, and quantum into the future. So the first thing we did is we sort of took out and we're going to spin out our managed infrastructure services business. So that's part of the focus. We are a hybrid cloud and AI company. So the pieces that fit that the most stay here. The pieces that don't, we'll spin out to go get value for our investors. Next, how are you going to lean into being even more of a hybrid cloud and AI company than you are today? So we're leaning in both organic investment and inorganic investment. I've completed 10 acquisitions, all on hybrid cloud and AI in the last 11 months and 25 days. So that's one step. But we've also opened up money for investment in terms of how we are going to invest both in our own organic innovation as well as with partners. So I announced a $1 billion fund that we're going to work with partners to enable them on our platforms. So you begin to put those things together and you say, okay, you're increasing investment, you're focusing the company, you're spinning out pieces, you're acquiring companies, you're increasing your ecosystem with partners, and those should all result then in revenue growth, and we have committed mid-single-digit revenue growth in the medium term. Now you put all that together, and then you begin to say that that is how you're going to value the company, and my goal is then to create a hybrid cloud platform that is even more vibrant than the mainframe and middleware was in the past, which are two platforms that we had a lot of success with.
Now, I know you're super excited about quantum, and I speak to many people who say they just don't think quantum is coming anytime soon. When will we see quantum truly transform the industry?
I give it a 3 to 5 year time period, which is not that long. So when you think about how hard that technology is, and I say that the market, so you always got to keep your eye on the economic opportunity. I think the economic opportunity, not just for us vendors, but for the people who use it, is in the $450 to $500 billion range within the decade. So then you can turn around, Emily, and say, how much of that will those of us who produce the technology get? If I go to all other technologies, 20% seems like a reasonable number. So the leaders in quantum stand to get as much as $100 billion somewhere in the next decade. Then you say, when is it going to happen? I think that it's quite real. So today you're having computers that are measured in qubits, quantum bits. So 30, maybe 60 is the range for this year. We just announced a partnership with the Cleveland Clinic, who wants to use quantum computing to further drug discovery, molecules, interactions around pathogens, et cetera. And that's an example where it's real problems. But I'll agree with you, it's not necessarily a commercial advantage or other forms of high performance computing or cloud today. I think that period will come in the next 3 to 5 years. We put out a roadmap to say, we'll put 1,000 quantum bit, 1,000 qubit quantum computer in 2023. I think that's a bold goal. I think it's hard. I wouldn't tell you we have every problem solved, but I have a tremendous pride and confidence in our scientists and engineers. And by the way, engineers are as important here as the physicists to get these big systems working in this time period. And that's where I believe we'll then get on the roadmap towards those billions of dollars of advantage that I mentioned.
Big news in chips. Recently, you're doing a partnership with Intel as they're doubling down on manufacturing, doubling down on a foundry business. Given all of the many industries that IBM is involved with in all of your diversity of clients, how devastating has the chip shortage been, and how much longer do you think it will last?
Whenever you get a constraint in a supply chain and you find that the sources and the manufacturing is down to one or two regions, this is going to last a few years. This is not a few months or a few weeks. So we should be clear about the impact. It's going to last that long. Then you say you've got to solve it. So we are working together with Intel because we do believe that there should be alternate sources of fabrication. And we do believe there should be competitive advantages in the more advanced nodes that are to come. That's where we have our strength. So we have a lot of work on 5, 3, 2 nanometers just to sort of categorize where we are. And just by the way, the world today is at 10 and 7 nanometers. So we're talking about the next generations. So we'll bring our advanced R&D into Intel, who will then produce the fabrication plants that can produce this at scale. And so we believe that that's a great way to work together. We also believe that that'll allow the pair of us together to be much better positioned to compete for the monies that are in the CHIPS Act, Endless Frontiers, as well as the National Semiconductor Technology Center. So those are all the opportunities in front of us that can result from the work we do together to advantage competitiveness within the nation.
IBM CEO Arvind Krishna there. You can catch the full interview at Bloomberg.com. All right, coming up, anti-vaccine groups on social media have a new target, women, and they've been quite effective. Details next. And as we head to break, let's take a look at the original FANG stocks, all in the green. The benchmark S&P 500 closing above 4,000 for the first time. Tech shares leading those gains. This is Bloomberg.
Just 12 accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram account for 65% of all the vaccine disinformation on your platforms. You're exposing tens of millions of users to this every day. Why, in the midst of a global pandemic that has killed over 500,000 Americans, that you haven't taken these accounts down?
Congressman Mike Doyle there of Pennsylvania expressing frustration to the CEOs of Facebook, Alphabet, and Twitter at last week's House hearing, claiming that the social networks have chosen not to take down accounts that spread vaccine misinformation. And in our latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week, we found that the influence of the anti-vaxxers has reached a very particular demographic: women, especially women looking to become mothers. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Sarah Kopit, who helped write the story. Sarah, the story was absolutely fascinating. Let's start at the high level. Why have anti-vaxxers picked women as a target?
Well, it's really because it worked the last time. Women have been the target of anti-vaxxers going back quite some time, because really the conversation before COVID-19 was about mothers and their babies with the MMR, measles, et cetera. And so what the anti-vaxxers had, their strategy at this time was really just to put COVID in front of vaccine and use the same playbook that they'd used previously, because it worked just that well. And that's what we're seeing right now, and it's resonating among so many women that Sarah Fryer and I talked to for this piece.
What did the women tell you? Because I understand you got a lot of different reasons from women who weren't getting the vaccine, and of course, the possibility of not being able to have a child was high on that list.
Yeah, so we heard the gambit, really. I think that the most prevalent one was really around safety. So people took an exception to how quickly the vaccine was produced, how they wanted to wait and see, really, and that's vaccine hesitancy, almost as a definition. And so that was a really big chunk. The fertility part was very interesting as well, and a lot of that stemmed from a blog that actually showed up on social media in early December of last year, and that blog claimed wrongly that the vaccine inhibits women's fertility, and that really found itself all over the social platforms. And that was just weeks before the emergency authorization was issued that allowed this vaccine to be given right at first to nurses and first responders. And it was a lot of those nurses that we talked to right at first. We went into nursing Facebook groups. We went online and we saw the conversations that they were having, and nursing as a profession skews very female. And that's really what they were talking about was, questions about, well, if I'm trying to become pregnant or if I'm pregnant already, should I just wait? And that's vaccine hesitancy.
And I just want to add that there is no evidence that the vaccine has a negative effect on women or pregnant women or can harm a woman's fertility. In your view, just as an observer, how are Facebook and Instagram responsible? Are they responsible for how this has proliferated on their platforms?
So they are certainly trying at this point. But their algorithms, their business model, what they try to do is they try to reward really engaging posts, and that's what drives what you see on the platform. And we know, just because of how we've studied disinformation over all these years, that lies really do spread faster than the truth. It is more interesting, more titillating a lot of times. We saw this with, when this fertility blog went out, Pfizer did come back with an answer to this question, does it affect fertility? And they gave a very robust scientific answer full of scientific jargon that we reference in the piece. And it's hard for that type of language to really resonate on social media. You have to, we say that the people who are giving the information have to do a little bit better. They have to live in this world where social media memes, that's what spreads. And the scientific community and the companies, they hadn't quite caught on to that yet.
All right, well, a fascinating piece, definitely worth your time in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Bloomberg's Sarah Kopit, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. All right, coming up, the first company solely focused on quantum computing is going public. Why the technology may soon be mainstream. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Let's get a quick recap of the market's big movers today with Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle in New York. Abigail, take it away.
Well, Emily, tech was really the story today. Big outperformance, particularly for the chips. That stocks closing up more than 3%, really outperforming almost near its all-time high. And one piece of this, Taiwan Semiconductor, they have boosted their spending plans. So that really put a bid under some of the other chip names, including Lam Research. That's a semi-cap equipment company. So they make the machinery that makes the chips. Often that's seen as an early tell. So the fact that you have Lam Research and Applied Materials, another semi-cap equipment company, is seen as a good sign. Plus, in Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, President Biden's infrastructure plan, $50 billion dedicated to chip manufacturing, trying to bring more chip business back here. So the chips really grew. Now, it's interesting, Emily, because relative to green power and EVs, a little bit of a split action. On the morning, huge surges in these spaces overall, because you can make the case that roughly $460 billion of that same plan in one way or the other is dedicated to climate change, improving the climate, green power, EV space. However, we see here on the close a little bit of a mix with fuel cell and Ballard Power closing down. Some of that could just be too far, too fast. As you know, fuel cell and some of these other names up in a huge way over the last year, actually just since President Biden was elected last November, up more than 900% at one point. It's really pretty incredible. So taking some chips off the table. And then, Emily, let's round it out with the biggest tech names, because here is why we had the big outperformance for the NASDAQ on the day, along with the S&P 500, tech being near the top sectors. It's all about your biggest companies. Microsoft, of course, getting that $22 billion contract from the Army, bringing the other mega caps higher with it. Emily, this is the catch-up trade. Tech not doing so great on the year, but right now it seems as though investors want in.
Exactly. All right, Abigail Doolittle, thanks so much for that roundup. All right, from finance to farming, space travel, and cars, the world depends on computers to crack, crunch, and deliver numbers and automate the world's most complex systems. But these computers can only do so much, and as technology and AI become more ever-present, the demand for even more powerful computing is taking off. Meet quantum. Quantum computing, the ability to compute information in a way that would never be possible with a conventional machine. In very broad terms, quantum computers can crunch and calculate scenarios at an exponentially faster rate than the common computer. These advanced processes now drawing the eyes of investors like the CEO of DMY Technology Group, Niccolo de Masi, who joined us back in December when his SPACs were in focus.
The first one was consumer, gaming, online casino. The second one is sportsbook data. The third one will be, something probably in cloud computing, AI computing, potentially even, something like quantum computing or cloud networking. The kinds of technologies really underpin the future of mobile.
That third company Demasi was talking about now, IonQ, making it the first public company solely focused on quantum computing. We're joined now by IonQ President and CEO, Peter Chapman. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. So why SPAC and why now?
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me on today. Well, as you mentioned in your intro, quantum computing is an entirely new paradigm for computing. And as with many technologies, it requires a significant investment to bring them to market. And becoming a public company gives us access to capital and resources to make quantum a reality.
So, mainstream quantum computing, though, how close is that really? We heard from the CEO of IBM earlier. He's really bullish on it. He said 3 to 5 years. I spoke to another CEO who's in a position to know, who says it is a long ways off.
Yep. Well, first, as I would say that different technologies have different horizons. Some of them, like ours, we also think is in the 3 to 5 years. But I think there's other technologies in quantum which are still 30 years away. I do think that this is the companies that make the devices are probably, have the advantage point in terms of being able to predict when they think they can bring a product to market.
So how do you believe quantum computing will change our lives as we know it and tackle real world problems? Like what will be different possible as a result?
Quantum computing, many people expect that quantum computers will be able to solve many of mankind's kind of grand challenges, everything from direct carbon capture to new drug discovery, new batteries, solving strong AI, improving machine learning. Since we're talking about just a much bigger computer, it's kind of hard to say where it won't be used. And I do think it's kind of an interesting question. If you were to go back to Intel and ask them in the 1970s, what did they think those little microprocessors were going to be used for? The answer back then was it was going to make a great calculator. And they couldn't really foresee the internet or cell phones happening. I think we're in that same place today for quantum. Where there's a bunch of things that we know about today that we use classical computers for. But I bet you 20 years from now, we'll look back at this and people will look at my answer and go, wow, you couldn't have imagined X, Y, and Z. And so we're exactly the same place kind of for quantum as we were in the 1970s.
You mentioned carbon capture, and I know Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy is one of your investors. You also worked at Amazon as the director of engineering for Prime for many years, and I'm curious, how could quantum computing revolutionize a company like Amazon?
Well, so quantum computing is good at solving optimization problems with a cost function. And so it turns out many business problems can be converted into an optimization problem. So as an example, what is the optimal route to deliver a package to a consumer? That's something that logistics companies are extremely interested in, because if you can just shave off a mile or two off of a driver's daily delivery route, you can save a great deal of money. So for somebody like Amazon, on the Amazon.com side, not the AWS side, you know, they should have a lot of interest in the logistics applications for quantum. And then, of course, you mentioned Bill Gates. There, it's things like direct carbon capture and better batteries, and even, you know, chemical applications. It turns out that in the production of fertilizer is one of the most polluting industries on the planet. It accounts for about 1% of all the carbon emissions. But bacteria know how to do it in soils without any extra energy. So we just don't have a classical computer that can do that modeling. But with a quantum computer, you'll be able to do it. We can unlock the secrets of how nature does it without polluting the environment. So it's these kinds of things that we think quantum computers are going to be good for.
Not to get too deep, but do you think that quantum will get us closer to the singularity where computers won't just be able to process the things we want to, but will actually be able to understand what we're asking them to do?
So, you know, first, before I started at Amazon, I worked with Ray Kurzweil for 7 years. So I'm very familiar with Ray and the singularity, and he's a good friend. The short answer is yes. Actually, myself am extremely interested in strong AI, and I think there's good reason to believe that a quantum computer will be able to unlock that as well. So I'm particularly hopeful there. That's a little speculative today, but I think in the next couple of years you'll start to see that quantum computing can help there too.
All right, fascinating. Well, we'll be watching on your path to the public markets. Peter Chapman, IonQ President and CEO, thanks for joining us. All right, coming up, Apple's much anticipated Worldwide Developers Conference will be held again virtually, the second year in a row. We're looking at what we can expect with our own Mark Gurman next. This is Bloomberg. Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, slated for June, is again going remote for the second time. The event usually marks attendees flying in from all around the world and networking with other like-minded Apple fans. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman thinks, though the company is itching to return to in-person events, this one will again be remote. Mark joins us now with more. What can you tell us about the event so far this year? What will be announced and how will it roll out?
Yeah, so WWDC is typically Apple's most important event of the year. This is where they outline their software roadmap for the next 12 to 18 months or so, and it always gives strong indicators of what the new hardware is to come. So for this year, unless Apple does show an early preview of their upcoming VR/AR headset, I think it's going to be a somewhat muted event. I'm not expecting major updates to iOS or macOS. I think the updates will be on the more moderate side this year. Perhaps a bigger update to the software that runs on the Apple Watch and another incremental update to the Apple TV software. But there's also a bunch of new Macs in the pipeline. The new MacBook Pros with faster, Apple design processors could make an appearance around that time. So perhaps the developer conference will be a good time to usher those in. So overall, I think it will be an exciting event for the Apple faithful, but I'm not anticipating anything major unless there is that preview of the headset.
How do you anticipate Apple events will change going forward? I mean, will they always be remote, or will they come back in their full glory with no changes at all?
Yeah, I think Apple events are going to come back to the normal in-person format as soon as possible. But I think they are going to do a little bit more to blend sort of the success of the virtual events with the in-person events. I think you'll get everything that was great about the in-person events, being able to go hands-on, being able to be there in person, seeing the products be unveiled on stage. But I think they're going to throw in a lot more video on the big screens in whatever auditorium they're presenting in to sort of give that virtual flavor. They'll have pre-taped videos of other engineers discussing products. They'll have videos of people going inside the labs to take a look at how the products are developed. So I think you'll see a nice combo there in the years to come.
Now, Amazon and Google, have talked more publicly about their return to work plans. We haven't heard as much from Apple. What do you know about Apple's plans and Tim Cook's desire for employees to get back to the office?
Yeah, so from the beginning, the push was to get Apple staff back into the offices as soon as possible. And Apple hasn't really talked about this, but there have been Apple employees still at their headquarters and offices around the world for essential functions from the very beginning, all the way from March, right at the height of the pandemic. And they're using a 4-phase approach to return people into the office. Phase 1 were those essential workers who were there from the beginning. And right now, the company is still in what they're calling phase 2. That means some employees are able to go in, if they'd like, into the office and work there during certain hours or certain days of the week. But there is yet to be a full force approach to push everyone back to the office. But I am expecting that to happen as early as the end of June into July after the developers conference.
Meantime, it is Apple's 45th birthday, and Tim Cook sent a letter to the company that you obtained. I just want to read a quote from it. He opens talking about the tradition of making transformative products that redefine technology. I quote, 45 years later, we mark this occasion, he writes, by rededicating ourselves to that mission and to keeping it alive for a long time to come, rather than to remember it fondly as something past. What do you think will define the next generation of Apple products under Tim's leadership?
Yeah, I mean, under Tim's leadership, so we're talking, perhaps the next 5 years or so. I think the 3 big remaining things are going to be some sort of push into the smart home, cleaning up their approach to smart homes, new home devices, a more cohesive strategy. I think the second thing will be headsets. That would be the first, VR/AR headset that will go on sale next year. And then later on, probably toward the end of Cook's tenure, they'll launch the, ultimate AR glasses, which should be a pretty hot seller down the road. And then I think a little further out from there would probably be a self-driving car or electric car of some sort. So those are the 3 big areas I'm looking at for, the rest of Tim Cook's leadership.
Well, if all of that comes to pass, it's going to be an exciting next 5 years or however long it is that Tim Cook continues to run the company. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, as always, thanks so much for joining us. Meantime, we just got some breaking news. President Biden's aides have set April 12th for the date of a summit with various companies to discuss the chip shortage that we've been talking about now for weeks on this show. Again, President Biden and his aides setting April 12th for a summit to discuss the chip shortage with various companies. Companies invited to this meeting include Samsung and GM, according to our Bloomberg sources. We'll bring you more headlines as we get them. All right, still ahead, in a pandemic world where more transactions are occurring digitally, financial crimes have surged. We'll talk to the head of the tech unicorn Feedzai, which fights financial crimes using AI after an impressive new funding round. And a reminder to stay with Bloomberg for our special programming around the U.S. Jobs Report Friday. Martin Walsh, U.S. Labor Secretary, joins a panel of other economic experts Friday morning. This is Bloomberg. As the world undergoes a massive wave of digitization, accelerated by the pandemic, Feedzai, an AI cloud-based risk management platform, has seen a 650% increase in financial account takeover scams and a 250% increase in online banking fraud attacks. Joining us now to discuss solutions for the rampant financial crimes, Feedzai co-founder and CEO Nuno Sebastião. The company recently raised $200 million in an investment round led by KKR, driving its valuation above $1 billion. So talk to us about how much and what kinds of activity you're seeing just heading into 2021.
So first of all, thank you for having me, Emily. So, I mean, as you mentioned, we saw, these impressive numbers in increase. And if you compare, even before, we have some stats comparing Q1 last year with Q4 last year, and the amount in fraud scams, 250% online fraud scams. The amount of impersonation, so someone trying to pretend to be you to gain access to your financial services systems or to your credit cards, over 600%. right? So it's been rampant, and it was already happening, but with this acceleration to digital that was kind of forced upon us, and particularly in the financial services area, it really blew up, and that basically increased the demand for these type of solutions.
So the unemployment system, for example, was plagued by $63 billion in fraud as unemployment was doled out to millions of Americans amidst the pandemic. How could your technology help?
We work, I mean, I cannot say too much about that, but when we work with, classified systems or with high security systems like the one you mentioned, making sure that, the money flows and gets to the consumers, that's where it needs to go. And it's done not only in an efficient way, but in a safe way. So what we essentially do is we work with organizations to ensure that whenever they wire money, for instance, PPP loans, or for instance, the checks are being wired, sent to people, we ensure that they get to their rightful, people, and to make sure that they land in the hands of the people that deserve it and that they stand for, not used for cyber criminal activities. And we do this at scale, not only in the US, but also in many regions throughout the globe.
So talk to us about your coming plans. You're working with KKR. Any plans to go public?
So, it's interesting. So we've been approached, and it kind of speed up last year by a number of firms. And the same way they chose us, KKR chose us as we're becoming the leader in this space. We chose them because their vision is very aligned with our vision. So they pick up leaders in the different spaces they work on. And what they ensure is they understand where do we want to go. And our vision is to ensure that we become the platform for financial crime risk management across all the touch points you use as a consumer, from the moment you try to open an account to the moment you're transacting. And just to give you some stats, up to 5% of the money that flows into financial services systems is used for money laundering. We make sure that doesn't happen or that stops. And they've realized that we would be the company that becomes that player. They're aligned with our growth. My intention is to be that independent company. If that's an IPO or if that's another mechanism, we will see. But clearly, they're betting on us winning this market the same way we're executing to that.
All right. We'll be watching. Feedzai co-founder and CEO Nuno Sebastião, thank you so much for joining us. All right, again this hour, we've learned that President Biden's top aides have set a date of April 12th as the date for a summit on the chip shortage that has been so devastating to the tech industry. Sources saying companies invited to the meeting include Samsung and GM. We're working to find out more. And next week, we will be bringing you a very special program all about the global semiconductor shortage. It's called Chip Crunch. We will have conversations with CEOs, analysts, and of course, the best of Bloomberg News. That show, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. in the UK, 5 a.m. in Asia. And speaking of Asia, we're going to bring you a special conversation with Baidu's CEO and co-founder, Robin Li. It'll cover Baidu's decade-long journey from being a search engine to a company that does everything from cloud computing to producing autonomous cars. That's tomorrow across Bloomberg Television. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Bloomberg.